Of all the secrets hidden behind velvet curtains and palace walls, could there be one so monstrous, so unthinkable, that it toppled the fate of an entire kingdom? And it all began between the legs of a king. You're standing in Madrid in the year 1834, summoned as a royal physician to the private chambers of the late Ferdinand VII, a monarch whose name echoes through history, not for glory or conquest, but for a single grotesque truth that the Vatican itself locked away for centuries. The king is dead, but your work is far from over, for you have been called to preserve the physical legacy of a man whose personal curse shaped the destiny of Spain, whose dark royal secrets transformed his marriage bed into a theater of horror, and whose very anatomy became the whispered fuel for revolutionary fires. The Queen Regent. Maria Cristina stands before you, eyes glistening with dread and desperation, begging you to perform a task so forbidden that even the walls seem to lean closer to listen. Because what lies beneath those heavy silk sheets is no ordinary royal remains. It is an anatomical monstrosity that no history book dared print, but that every shadowed corridor of the palace knows too well. Ferdinand VII was a man born into the poisonous web of centuries of royal inbreeding emerging from the Spanish Bourbon dynasty, as a living monument to dark history and genetic disaster, cursed with an endowment so freakishly oversized, so alien in shape, that it became both the emblem of his twisted pride and the root of his deepest shame. This was the dark royal drama that destroyed 3 queens, left Spain trembling under the weight of scandal, and turned a king's bedchamber into a forbidden history lesson in cruelty, paranoia, and forbidden medical experiments. Today we dive into this shocking royal scandal, a story of kings, queens, and a secret so bizarre it still festers in the Vatican vaults, unseen yet omnipresent in the annals of weird royal medical conditions and dark history documentaries. If you thirst for history's most chilling truths, if you're drawn to the hidden corridors where royal drama and forbidden history collide, then stay with me as we peel back the silk sheets covering one of Europe's most forbidden secrets, a secret that turned love into terror and power into madness. He was not cursed by witches nor smitten by divine wrath, but forged in the deadly crucible of royal bloodlines tangled far too tightly where cousins married cousins, where uncles took nieces as brides, and where generations of forbidden unions birthed monsters wearing golden crowns, a truth so twisted it deserves its own chapter in the darkest royal secrets of Europe. Ferdinand VII, born on October 14, 1784, at El Escorial Palace, came screaming into the world as the living embodiment of a genetic time bomb, his very flesh stamped with the Bourbon legacy of inbreeding that left Spain's throne haunted by deformities and shadows of madness. The royal chronicles speak in whispers, concealing what history's forbidden pages know all too well. Ferdinand's body harbored an anatomical phenomenon that defied medicine, a bizarre, oversized member whose monstrous proportions and alien shape would cast a sinister shadow over his destiny and leave behind a royal scandal so shocking it still festers as dark history hidden in the Vatican's vaults and whispered about by historians of forbidden history and dark royal drama. In a dynasty where even the smallest rumor could ignite political chaos, his grotesque gift became the source of cruel laughter, hushed gossip, and an unending sense of shame that bled into every corridor of the palace, poisoning Ferdinand's mind and seeding the paranoia that would one day make him the king who destroyed his own kingdom from within. The Spanish court trembled under a reign marked by violent mood swings, vengeful cruelty, and obsessions with shadows lurking behind every polite smile. A king whose weird royal medical condition wasn't merely a secret to hide, but the key that unlocked an entire dark royal scandal, transforming private suffering into a public catastrophe. And so while other princes were shaped by swords and treaties, Ferdinand was shaped by a single monstrous truth of flesh and blood, a grotesque legacy waiting to unleash unspeakable horrors on every woman unlucky enough to share his bed and on the entire fate of Spain itself. Yet even this horrific origin is merely the prologue, because what happened behind the silk-draped doors of Ferdinand's marital chambers would become the cruelest testament to how one man's forbidden anatomy could tear apart both love and empire. And that, my friends, is where our story plunges even deeper into the nightmare. As Ferdinand grew from a pale, quiet child into an adolescent cloaked in royal silks, it became terrifyingly clear that nature had chosen him as its cruelest joke, crafting within his royal flesh a monstrous aberration that defied logic, medicine, and decency, a secret so scandalous that it would become one of the most shocking royal scandals ever buried in the forbidden vaults of dark history. By the time he reached his teenage years, court physicians were already whispering about what they dared only record in secret notes hidden deep within Vatican archives, that the future king of Spain bore an organ so enormous, so twisted in form, it belonged more to the pages of myth than to the human body. Some called it the king's hidden scepter. Others whispered of it as the devil's own staff, a symbol of both power and grotesque tragedy. Contemporary records described it in chilling detail, speaking of a member thin as sealing wax at its base, thick as a man's fist at its extremity, and long enough to serve as a walking stick, a sentence that alone could rank among the most shocking revelations in any history documentary or forbidden history series, desperate to unearth the weird royal medical conditions hidden from the world. In an age when male beauty was measured by classical ideals that favored moderation and elegance, Ferdinand's grotesque endowment became a private hell. A brand burned into his identity, transforming him from a boy prince into a vessel of shame, rage, and bitter paranoia. Servants gossiped behind trembling hands. Foreign diplomats documented the rumors in secret reports, and the Spanish court learned to walk delicately around a prince whose monstrous secret fueled the kind of dark royal drama that makes viewers devour dark history documentaries today. The weight of his deformity was not merely physical, but psychological, breeding a storm of vindictive cruelty and suspicion that would fester into tyranny. Ferdinand's rage found victims among his own household staff, with punishments cruel and calculated, as though silencing laughter he suspected always hid just beyond the next velvet curtain. And this festering paranoia would soon infect not just Ferdinand's private chambers, but the very heart of Spain's royal bloodline, for what lay ahead was far more terrifying than whispered rumors. Because this royal curse was destined to collide head-on with marriage vows, wedding nights, and the terrified eyes of royal brides who would come to know the true horror hidden beneath the silk sheets. It was only a matter of time before Ferdinand's monstrous secret crashed into the most sacred of royal duties, marriage, and the production of an heir. A collision that would spark a dark royal drama so harrowing it deserves a throne among history's most shocking royal scandals and forbidden histories. In 1802, young Ferdinand, still burdened by the poisonous blood of his inbred dynasty and by the towering shadow of his grotesque endowment, was betrothed to his first cousin, Princess Maria Antonia of Naples, and Sicily, a radiant, intelligent girl raised on tales of royal grandeur and delicate courtly love, utterly unprepared for the nightmare that awaited her. Their wedding was a spectacle crafted to project power and stability, with cathedrals echoing sacred hymns, streets bursting with celebration, and foreign courts watching every glittering detail for signs that Spain's troubled monarchy might finally secure its future. But as any student of dark history knows, behind the fanfare often lurks unspeakable horror, and for Maria Antonia, her wedding night would become a page ripped straight from the darkest forbidden history documentaries. When Ferdinand entered the bridal chamber, flanked by nervous valets carrying mysterious medical implements and custom-designed cushions, Maria Antonia had no inkling that her new husband's body concealed a monstrous truth that would turn royal romance into royal trauma. The first glimpse of Ferdinand undressed shattered every illusion the sheltered princess had ever held about marriage. Her screams, described in secret letters by a lady-in-waiting, echoed off the gilded chamber walls as she shrieked, "Monster, monster," pointing in terror at what court physicians later clinically described as a great club with a thin handle curved and studded with alien growths. The moment transformed the royal wedding bed into a grotesque surgical theater, complete with physicians orchestrating a mechanical clinical process to attempt consummation. A macabre scene whispered through palace corridors and preserved only in hidden letters and dark royal secrets archives. Maria Antonia, robbed of any notion of romantic union, quickly spiraled into a life dependent on laudanum to numb the physical agony and psychological terror forced upon her each time Ferdinand, driven by his paranoia and obsession to produce an heir, demanded another attempt. What unfolded between those silk sheets was not merely a marital crisis, but a national catastrophe in the making, as the Spanish monarchy's most intimate dysfunction spilled into the realm of politics, religion, and scandal, planting the seeds for Spain's eventual collapse under the weight of royal shame. And yet, as tragic as Maria Antonia's screams were, they would prove only the first notes in a symphony of royal suffering, because Ferdinand's obsessions would soon become even more twisted, dragging future queens, palace physicians, and an entire empire deeper into a nightmare that blurred the line between medicine and madness. Night after night, Maria Antonia found herself dragged back into a royal chamber that had ceased to be a sanctuary and had become a chamber of horrors, a place where velvet drapes concealed the moans of pain, where silk sheets soaked up the silent tears of a queen whose only crime was marrying a king cursed with a monstrous secret that would become one of the most shocking royal scandals in the annals of forbidden history. In Ferdinand's twisted mind, each failed attempt to produce an heir was not the cruel consequence of his grotesque anatomy, but Maria Antonia's fault, a belief that fed his paranoia, breeding a toxic cocktail of rage and royal entitlement. Court physicians, their hands trembling as they recorded each detail in hidden documents destined for dark history documentaries, described Ferdinand's member in stark clinical language, an organ with a base no thicker than a man's thumb, expanding to a circumference defying nature, and stretching nearly 10 inches in its natural state, with further monstrous growth upon arousal, a deformity so severe that even specialized marital cushions and instruments of royal medical ingenuity could not shield his young bride from injury and terror. Maria Antonia's body became a battlefield each encounter, leaving her bruised, bleeding, and increasingly addicted to laudanum, a drug that dulled the physical agony, but did nothing to numb the psychological scars. The Spanish court, ever ravenous for gossip, whispered about the screaming that rattled through palace corridors, about how a royal marriage had devolved into a grotesque ritual of medical interventions, leather restraints, and oils meant not to enhance pleasure, but to prevent physical harm. A narrative so rich in dark royal drama and weird royal medical conditions that it's tailor-made for viral history documentaries. As months turned into years, with no successful pregnancy, Ferdinand's desperation festered into cruelty, driving him to suspect Maria Antonia of secret liberal sympathies, of intentionally sabotaging conception, even of attempting to curse him through witchcraft. The king, obsessed with his royal image and driven by a fear of becoming history's greatest sexual failure, summoned astrologers, alchemists, and mystics, chasing any forbidden path that might finally deliver an heir. Yet each new ritual, each concoction of exotic powders and potions, only dragged both monarchs deeper into a darkness from which neither would emerge unscathed. For while Maria Antonia's life was being consumed by silent screams and opium dreams, Ferdinand's own soul was hardening into a monstrous blend of paranoia and power, a transformation that would ensure the tragedies of his first marriage were only the beginning, as he turned his sights to a new queen, who too would soon learn the price of sharing a bed with the most cursed king in Europe. When Maria Antonia's tragic screams finally faded into silence, and her delicate frame succumbed to a lonely death at just 21, a casualty of laudanum addiction, relentless trauma, and the unending horror of a marriage built on pain, the Spanish court barely had time to mourn before Ferdinand VII, still tormented by the monstrous secret that had transformed his private life into a forbidden history, worthy of any dark royal drama, set his ruthless sights on securing a new bride. Enter Maria Isabel of Portugal, another cousin drawn into the royal blood web, a young woman of 19 whose only shield against the twisted destiny awaiting her was a fragile naivete destined to shatter beneath the weight of a royal scandal so shocking that whispers of it still echo through the corridors of Europe's forbidden history. The second marriage was orchestrated with the same extravagant pageantry as the first golden vestments cathedral bells streets, festooned with banners, all in a desperate attempt to convince Spain and its foreign allies that Ferdinand was not a cursed monarch, but a king on the brink of securing a powerful heir. But behind the shimmering illusion, the dark reality loomed for nothing. Neither priest's blessings nor ornate marital contracts could alter the monstrous truth lurking beneath Ferdinand's regal attire. On the wedding night, Maria Isabel found herself face to face with a horror that surpassed the darkest nightmares painted in history. documentaries the king's grotesquely distorted organ, an anatomical deformity so large and bizarre in shape that medical texts struggled to describe it without lapsing into stunned silence. The result was a scene more reminiscent of surgical theater than royal romance, as screams pierced the palace walls and servants fled in terror from the echoes of a queen's agony. Secret letters and forbidden archives later recorded how blood stained the silken sheets, how furniture splintered under the violent struggle, and how the young queen's eyes, once bright with hope, grew glassy with a 1,000-yard stare. From that night onward, Maria Isabel recoiled at Ferdinand's presence, developing nervous tics, phantom pregnancies, and a fear so profound that her very body seemed to shrink from existence, a living specter haunting a palace that had become a prison. Yet Ferdinand, fueled by paranoia and consumed by an obsession to produce an heir that would legitimize his reign, and silence rumors about his dark royal secret, only grew more unhinged, convinced that his bride's terror was treason cloaked in silk. What followed was an escalation of cruelty and invasive surveillance that blurred the line between royal duty and psychological torture, plunging Spain deeper into a vortex of weird royal medical conditions and scandalous royal drama. And though Maria Isabel's story would soon come to a tragic end, the king's obsession would not die with her, for Ferdinand's insatiable drive to conquer both his own monstrous body and the political fate of his kingdom was far from over setting the stage for a third marriage that would take the grotesque royal saga into even darker, more clinical territory. After Maria Isabel's pale and trembling silhouette faded from the royal stage, carried off by the silent reaper of nervous exhaustion and unrelenting terror, Ferdinand VII stood once again before a crumbling Spanish throne, a king consumed by both his monstrous secret and the gnawing panic of an empire on the brink of collapse, a truth so soaked in dark royal scandal that it's tailor-made for forbidden history documentaries and the kind of viral royal drama that seizes the internet's imagination. Unwilling to surrender to the notion of a childless dynasty, Ferdinand scoured Europe for yet another queen, casting his gaze this time toward Maria Josepha Amalia of Saxony, a 24-year-old princess whose family's fragile fortunes left her vulnerable to the desperate gilded lure of the Spanish crown. Unlike her predecessors, Maria Josepha arrived in Madrid better prepared, carrying not just elegant gowns and royal jewels, but her own personal physician, and a collection of medical devices designed to navigate the treacherous terrain of her husband's grotesque endowment, a detail that alone could headline any dark history documentary about weird royal medical conditions. But even armed with knowledge and strategy, Maria Josepha was destined to discover that Ferdinand's curse was not merely physical, but psychological. A monstrous blend of sexual dysfunction and regal paranoia that transformed their marriage into a series of meticulously scheduled, medically supervised rituals, more reminiscent of laboratory experiments than of any notion of marital affection. Secret diaries and forbidden archives reveal how the Queen kept records in painstaking detail, documenting times, positions, and outcomes with the clinical detachment of a surgeon, while Ferdinand brooded nearby, convinced that his wife viewed him not as a man, but as an anatomical curiosity fit for dissection. Each attempt at royal consummation played out like a grim stage show, with physicians and servants tiptoeing through velvet curtains, whispering instructions, adjusting custom-crafted cushions, and preparing potions, rumored to either shrink Ferdinand's monstrous organ or at least render it less lethal, a narrative so bizarre it feels almost too shocking to belong outside the pages of dark royal secrets. Maria Josepha endured this twisted marital laboratory with stoic determination, but even her resilience buckled under the relentless weight of Ferdinand's suspicions, and his growing fear that she was secretly communicating the intimate details of his curse back to Saxony. Yet amid this sterile horror, a flicker of hope finally appeared after nearly a decade of clinical torment. Maria Josepha became pregnant, sending ripples of shock and guarded celebration through the Spanish court, where whispers swirled about whether Spain's cursed king might finally secure a legitimate heir. But this brief hope would be violently snuffed out, for what lay ahead was a tragedy so brutal, so soaked in blood and despair, that it would not only devastate Maria Josepha, but push Ferdinand to the very brink of madness, a nightmare whose echoes would stain the halls of Madrid and feed the shadows of forbidden history forever. Hope so long absent from Ferdinand VII's cursed reign flickered back to life like a trembling candle when Maria Josefa's long-awaited pregnancy was announced, a revelation that ignited the Spanish court with a volatile cocktail of euphoria, suspicion, and the unmistakable scent of dark royal drama, destined to become one of the most shocking royal scandals lurking in the vaults of forbidden history. For nearly a decade, the marriage between Ferdinand and Maria Josefa had been a clinical ordeal, each attempt at intimacy logged in meticulous journals as if the royal bedchamber were a surgical theater rather than a sanctuary of passion. Now at last there was proof, or so it seemed, that the monstrous obstacle which had haunted Ferdinand's loins and mind might finally yield a royal heir, a potential salvation for a dynasty teetering on the edge of collapse. Yet even in celebration, shadows loomed, because Ferdinand's paranoia mutated into a manic obsession with protecting the fragile life forming inside Maria Josefa. He summoned physicians from every corner of Europe, fortified the Queen's quarters with guards, and demanded daily reports on her pulse, her complexion, and the smallest fluctuations in her mood, convinced that invisible forces plotted to steal his heir. Whispers spread through the palace like wildfire, fueling a narrative tailor-made for viral history documentaries about weird royal medical conditions and forbidden royal secrets, that Maria Josefa might be carrying a child not just cursed by genetic legacy, but already doomed by the horrors inflicted upon her body in years of medicalized marital torment. As Maria Josefa's belly swelled, so too did Ferdinand's madness. He ordered the alignment of astrological charts to dictate when he might even approach his wife, and he interrogated midwives under threats of torture about possible conspiracies to sabotage the birth. But fate, always cruel in the twisted saga of Ferdinand VII, struck a devastating blow in May of 1829, when Maria Josefa was seized by searing pain and cast into a labor so violent, so soaked in blood and desperate cries that even seasoned physicians recoiled. In a chamber echoing with screams and the coppery scent of royal blood, a daughter was delivered, prematurely gasping her first and last breaths. Within hours, a tiny life extinguished before she could even be crowned as hope for a crumbling empire. Maria Josefa, broken by fever grief and the relentless cruelty of destiny, survived the birth only to wither away days later, leaving Ferdinand pacing the corridors like a phantom consumed by a madness deeper and darker than ever before. But this was not the final act in the king's grotesque saga, for Ferdinand's insatiable obsession with producing an heir would soon lead him into a fourth marriage, a union entangled in deception, betrayal, and a forbidden royal scandal so explosive it would stain the very soul of Spain. But even as the funeral bells tolled for Maria Josefa and the tiny lifeless daughter who was meant to save the Bourbon dynasty, Ferdinand VII, haunted by a monstrous secret and driven by a paranoia that had long since devoured any shred of reason, refused to abandon his quest for an heir, plunging headlong into yet another marriage that would become one of the most forbidden royal scandals to ever fester beneath the marble pillars of European palaces. Enter Maria Cristina of Naples, a young woman swept into the spider's web of Spanish politics, unaware, or perhaps grimly resigned, that she was about to wed a king whose bedroom had become a chamber of horrors chronicled in secret letters and whispered about in forbidden history documentaries that thrive on dark royal drama and shocking royal scandals. But this union carried a twist so outrageous, it seems ripped from the wildest viral YouTube script. Maria Cristina was already pregnant when she arrived in Madrid bearing the child of another man, and yet Ferdinand, battered by loss and consumed by a desperation to solidify his crumbling legacy, not only accepted this deception, but embraced it as divine intervention. The wedding proceeded beneath golden arches and stained glass, but behind the spectacle loomed a truth so scandalous it threatened to unravel the fragile threads holding Spain's monarchy together, a king crowning another man's child as his own heir, hoping to fool both God and the entire European order. The birth of Isabella II in 1830 should have sealed Ferdinand's triumph, but instead it sowed fresh seeds of terror for the king, who knew the child could not possibly share his blood, was consumed by fear that the truth would burst forth, toppling his throne and exposing the monstrous reality he had fought so savagely to conceal. Thus began an era of surveillance and suspicion so suffocating it could headline any dark history documentary on forbidden royal secrets as Ferdinand prowled the palace like a predator, drilling peepholes into his queen's chambers, reading her private letters, interrogating servants under threat of exile or worse, all in pursuit of evidence that Maria Cristina was conspiring with foreign powers to dethrone him. What should have been moments of paternal joy instead twisted into obsession as Ferdinand scrutinized baby Isabella's features, commissioning painters to capture every nuance of her face, comparing her infant eyes and lips to portraits of potential biological fathers determined to see himself in a child who bore not a trace of his blood. But while Ferdinand spiraled deeper into madness, a storm was gathering far beyond the palace walls, a gathering fury that would turn whispers of royal scandal into a cataclysm threatening to sweep away not just one man's reign, but the very future of Spain itself. Outside the royal walls, Spain bled from old wounds and new rebellions. But inside the marble corridors of Madrid's palace, Ferdinand VII was waging a war even darker, a war against Shadow's secrets and the monstrous truth that his reign and his manhood were both cursed beyond salvation. A narrative so soaked in forbidden history and dark royal drama that it could fuel viral documentaries for decades to come. His suspicions, already sharpened to a knife's edge by the humiliations of 3 catastrophic marriages and the grotesque burden between his legs, now twisted into a venomous paranoia aimed squarely at Maria Cristina and the child she carried into his dynasty. Ferdinand transformed the palace into a fortress of surveillance, a labyrinth of secret passages and cleverly hidden spy holes through which he would watch his queen for hours, eyes wild with terror and suspicion, convinced that each gentle gesture, each whispered prayer, each private tear might conceal a conspiracy to depose him or reveal that Isabella II was not truly his flesh and blood. Ministers and servants alike cowered under the weight of his constant interrogations. Food tasters suffered exhaustion from endless rounds of testing. Guards were rotated so frequently that no man could become loyal enough to betray the king's secrets, a climate so drenched in fear and royal scandal that it belongs among the most shocking royal scandals ever whispered in Europe's forbidden history. Meanwhile, Maria Cristina herself became a ghost within the palace. Her days measured by the rhythm of dread, her letters intercepted her private time with Isabella scrutinized as though it were treason. Foreign ambassadors documented in secret reports how the Spanish court had become an unstable theater of whispered accusations, arbitrary arrests, and bizarre rituals driven by a monarch whose personal demons had metastasized into national calamity. The king, once merely a tragic figure burdened by a monstrous physical curse, had become the architect of a regime so poisoned by fear that even the simplest human gesture, a mother's touch, a wife's sigh, was treated as evidence in a royal conspiracy trial. Yet for all his obsessive vigilance, Ferdinand could not silence the ticking clock of mortality, nor the gnawing certainty that Spain was fracturing under his rule. His health deteriorated, his mind flickered between delusion and lucidity, and he found himself increasingly haunted not only by the living, but by the ghosts of 3 dead queens and the ever-looming specter of his own dark royal secret. But even as Ferdinand's world contracted into a palace-sized prison of mirrors and spies, one final revelation awaited, a forbidden truth buried in flesh and bone so shocking that its discovery would ensure Ferdinand VII's name would echo through the ages as the embodiment of how personal monstrosity can become a nation's doom. And so it was that in the suffocating twilight of his reign, as Spain convulsed under rebellion's economic ruin and a monarchy teetering on the brink, Ferdinand VII, the king whose entire life had been haunted by a monstrous secret and woven into the fabric of dark royal drama, finally succumbed to the ravages of his own collapsing body and mind, a downfall destined to become one of the most shocking royal scandals preserved in the forbidden annals of European history. By 1833, his health had become as grotesquely twisted as the anatomical curse he carried beneath his regal robes: chronic digestive disorders, trembling hands, and a mind that slipped like quicksilver between lucid paranoia and fevered hallucination. In private chambers that had witnessed more horror than passion, Ferdinand spent his last days pacing between velvet curtains and flickering candlelight, muttering about poison conspiracies and the ghosts of his 3 dead queens, whose pale faces he claimed hovered at the edges of his vision. The king who once inspired roaring crowds and terrified courtiers now shrank into a shadow of himself, trapped in a palace that had become a golden cage, its corridors echoing with the weight of forbidden history and the grim legacy of weird royal medical conditions. Yet even in his final breaths, Ferdinand's obsession with his dark royal secret refused to die. As his body weakened, he demanded that his physicians, those same terrified men who for decades had tried and failed to make his monstrous anatomy fit for royal duty, stand witness to one final revelation. Upon his death, an autopsy was ordered in absolute secrecy, revealing the full extent of nature's cruel joke. An organ measuring an astounding 14 inches in length, monstrous in shape, grotesquely variable in girth, with internal scarring that testified to years of failed medical interventions, and even most disturbingly repeated attempts at self-surgery, as Ferdinand had tried in desperation to carve his own flesh into something approaching normalcy. It was a discovery so explosive, so soaked in dark royal scandal, that it was sealed away within the secret archives of the Vatican, locked behind iron doors, to ensure that Ferdinand VII's grotesque truth would remain hidden from the eyes of a world already reeling from centuries of royal intrigue. Yet, in sealing away that piece of flesh, they could not bury the truth that Ferdinand's reign had become the ultimate cautionary tale, a monument to how personal dysfunction can metastasize into national tragedy, how one man's secret horror can poison an entire kingdom's destiny. And though Ferdinand's tortured soul finally found peace beneath the stone floors of the Escorial, the monstrous legacy he left behind was destined to echo for generations for waiting. In the shadows was a young Queen Isabella II, whose contested claim to the throne would plunge Spain into chaos civil war, and yet another chapter in the empire's long saga of forbidden history and dark royal drama. Yet, even as the stone walls of El Escorial swallowed the corpse of Ferdinand VII and the crimson velvet drapes fell upon the final act of a reign drenched in forbidden history and dark royal drama, Spain could not simply close the book on the monstrous legacy he had left behind, a legacy so steeped in shocking royal scandal that its echoes continue to ripple through every corridor of European historical intrigue. For Ferdinand's grotesque anatomical secret, locked away in the Vatican's forbidden vaults, was never merely a private torment. It was the grotesque symbol of a reign that had twisted love into cruelty, turned marriage into medical horror, and converted a once great empire into a crumbling stage for dark royal drama. The king's death did not sever the poisonous roots he'd sunk into Spain's fate. Instead, it flung open the gates to chaos, for the infant Queen Isabella II, barely able to toddle, yet already draped in royal silk, was now thrust into a throne, haunted by whispers that she was not truly her father's child, a forbidden royal secret so potent it threatened to ignite civil war. Courtiers who had spent years tiptoeing around Ferdinand's monstrous shadow now found themselves trapped in a fresh labyrinth of conspiracy and factional violence, as rival claims erupted from Don Carlos Ferdinand's brother and from those who refused to accept a queen whose bloodline was tainted both by political intrigue and the monstrous truth hidden beneath Ferdinand's burial shroud. Revolutionary pamphlets flooded the streets, painting Isabella as the child of adultery, a puppet of foreign powers. Her existence, the final proof that the Bourbon dynasty had become a grotesque mockery of kingship, a narrative perfect for any viral history documentary eager to expose the dark royal secrets that toppled empires. Meanwhile, in the Vatican's silent halls, the preserved fragment of Ferdinand's monstrous anatomy lay entombed, a relic of twisted flesh and unspeakable tragedy, guarded not merely as a medical curiosity, but as a political time bomb whose revelation could further fracture Spain's already splintering realm. The courtiers and priests who knew the truth understood that this grotesque artifact was more than a royal organ. It was a testament to how one man's private deformity had metastasized into a national catastrophe, dragging queens to early graves, hurling a nation into revolt, and redefining the very idea of monarchy as a fragile masquerade, hiding monstrous secrets. And so, while Ferdinand VII found his final rest, Spain braced itself for a bloody storm, as the question of Isabella's legitimacy and the hidden horrors of her father's reign threatened to plunge the kingdom into an abyss of forbidden history from which it might never escape. It was as though Ferdinand VII's monstrous secret refused to die with him clawing its way back into the light, even as his corpse lay beneath marble slabs. For the real horror was that his private affliction had never been merely his own. It had metastasized into the veins of an entire kingdom, twisting Spain's destiny into a tale fit for the darkest royal drama and destined to feed viral history documentaries for centuries to come. Isabella II, crowned while still a child, barely out of swaddling cloths, found herself thrust onto a throne, dripping with the blood and secrets of a father whose monstrous anatomy was now the forbidden history lurking behind every whispered conversation in palace corridors. No longer was Ferdinand's deformity simply a bizarre footnote in the annals of weird royal medical conditions. It had become a political weapon wielded by factions determined to unravel the fragile tapestry holding Spain together. Don Carlos Ferdinand's ambitious brother seized upon the whispers of Isabella's illegitimacy, fueling a propaganda storm that painted her not merely as the child of another man, but as the living embodiment of Bourbon corruption, foreign interference, and the monstrous royal scandal hidden beneath velvet drapes. The result was a civil war, not simply for a crown, but for the soul of Spain itself, a bloody convulsion where soldiers bled on battlefields while pamphlets circulated depicting Ferdinand's grotesque organ as the ultimate proof that divine order had abandoned the Spanish monarchy. Inside the palace, Maria Cristina lived like a prisoner, haunted by Ferdinand's memory, navigating a court poisoned by suspicion where every glance, every gesture could be interpreted as treason, and where priests and courtiers alike guarded the Vatican's dark secret with fanatical silence. Meanwhile, Europe watched both horrified and enthralled as Spain descended into chaos, its monarchy's reputation shredded by the revelation that power and sexual dysfunction had become inseparably intertwined, a narrative so rich in dark royal drama and forbidden history that it was destined to echo through viral content and historical documentaries long after the guns fell silent. Yet the tragedy of Ferdinand VII's reign was more than just the spectacle of scandal. It was a devastating lesson in how the private monsters of a single ruler can devour an entire nation, leaving behind not just broken dynasties and dead queens, but a legacy of fear and silence that would linger like the scent of old blood in the marble halls of Spanish power. And as Spain's wounds festered, and the question of Isabella's right to rule tore the country apart, one truth remained unspoken yet omnipresent, that somewhere sealed in the Vatican's vaults lay the grotesque physical testament to a reign that had reshaped not only a family, but the destiny of an empire, ensuring that Ferdinand VII's dark royal secret would remain the most forbidden history Europe had ever known. In the end, Ferdinand VII's reign stands as one of the most chilling cautionary tales in all of dark royal history, a narrative so drenched in forbidden secrets, twisted anatomy, and the catastrophic intersection of private obsession and public power that it begs to be retold in every viral documentary, seeking to expose the shadows lurking behind golden crowns. For what makes Ferdinand's story so hypnotic and so terrifying is that it was never merely about a grotesque physical deformity hidden beneath silk robes. It was about how that deformity metastasized into a kingdom's ruin, how the monstrous became political, and how one man's torment poisoned an entire empire's destiny. From the moment Ferdinand was born under the weight of centuries of royal inbreeding, his life was destined to dance on the knife's edge between spectacle and nightmare. His body became the vessel of dark royal scandal whispered about in secret letters and hidden medical records, his towering endowment transforming him into a living curiosity, feared and ridiculed a man both king and prisoner of his own flesh. But the true tragedy was that Ferdinand learned to wield his monstrous secret like a weapon, forging a reign steeped in paranoia, cruelty, and the obsessive pursuit of an heir who would legitimize both his throne and his own fractured masculinity. The silken corridors of Madrid's royal palace became echo chambers for screams, not of treason, but of brides whose wedding nights collapsed into surgical horrors, each queen consumed and discarded in a relentless cycle of trauma and political expediency. It was a reign where statecraft and sexual dysfunction became indistinguishable, where velvet drapes hid not just royal liaisons, but the implements of medical experimentation, and where the king's terror of being exposed as less than a man twisted into political purges and conspiracies that choked the very breath from Spain's body politic. And even as Ferdinand's corpse cooled in El Escorial, the shadows of his monstrous secret continued to slither through the corridors of power, ensuring that his name would echo through history, not as a monarch of might or wisdom, but as the embodiment of how private demons can devour entire nations. For the story of Ferdinand VII is not merely the tale of a king cursed by grotesque flesh. It is the grim reminder that absolute power, when yoked to private agony, can transform human suffering into a national apocalypse. And as Spain staggered into a new era under the trembling rule of Isabella II, the world was left to ponder a question that still haunts the pages of forbidden history. Can a kingdom ever truly escape the monstrous shadows cast by the secrets of its kings? For beneath the velvet robes, the marble halls, and the shimmering gold of royal insignia, Ferdinand VII's life was the stark revelation that power left unchecked and entwined with private agony can spawn nightmares so grotesque they become the ultimate fodder for dark royal dramas and viral forbidden history documentaries that captivate millions hungry for secrets hidden beneath crowns. His was not the story of a king who simply ruled poorly or fell victim to political machinations. It was the harrowing saga of a man whose physical deformity dictated the fate of queens, the trajectory of empires, and the very architecture of European geopolitics. That monstrous misshapen organ, 14 inches of anatomical aberration sealed away in the Vatican's darkest vaults, was more than flesh and blood. It was the pulsating symbol of a reign defined by pained secrecy and the relentless attempt to forge normality out of biological chaos. Ferdinand's palace became both a stage and a prison, where every shadow whispered conspiracy, and where marital chambers morphed into medical laboratories stained with royal blood and echoing with the muffled screams of queens reduced to terrified patients. Servants learned to avert their eyes, physicians prayed that their knowledge would not condemn them, and foreign ambassadors penned dispatches thick with dread, for they understood that Spain was ruled not by policy or statesmanship, but by the volatile terror bred in a king's twisted flesh. And while Ferdinand may have finally surrendered his tortured breath in 1833, his monstrous legacy outlived him, ensuring that the name Ferdinand VII would forever stand as a monument to how personal shame can metastasize into national disaster. For even as Spain staggered toward civil war fueled by questions about Isabella II's true bloodline and the legitimacy of Bourbon rule, the true horror remained hidden behind Vatican walls, a grotesque relic waiting perhaps for the day its revelation would shatter the last illusions of royal grandeur. The tale of Ferdinand VII serves as the darkest of reminders that the line between royal majesty and monstrous tragedy is as thin as silk, and that sometimes the most forbidden history is the history still pounding like a hidden pulse beneath the marble floors of palaces. And so, as the shadows lengthen over Spain's blood-soaked past, we must ask ourselves, how many other crowns, how many other thrones still hide secrets that could topple empires if ever brought into the unforgiving light? And so, as we stand at the precipice of history, peering back into the velvet shadows of a royal court poisoned by secrets, we're left with the haunting realization that Ferdinand VII's monstrous legacy was not merely a curiosity to be sealed away in Vatican vaults, but a living curse that rippled across generations, transforming the throne of Spain into a stage for one of the most shocking royal scandals ever whispered in forbidden history, a tale so dripping with dark royal drama that it remains magnetic fuel for viral documentaries and midnight conversations among those who hunger for the secrets of kings. His grotesque anatomy, that 14-inch testament to nature's cruelest joke, was far more than the personal torment of a single man. It became the pivot upon which the fate of queens, the legitimacy of dynasties, and the survival of empires turned. Each queen who entered Ferdinand's golden prison bore witness to a truth so horrific it shattered their bodies and minds, leaving behind not only blood-stained sheets, but a psychic trauma that echoed through the marble corridors like a chorus of ghosts. Maria Antonia, Maria Isabel, Maria Josepha. All were swallowed by a marital bed that doubled as a surgical theater, their screams muffled by royal decorum, yet preserved forever in forbidden archives, waiting to explode into viral infamy. Meanwhile, Ferdinand's desperate pursuit of an heir metastasized into paranoia, political purges, and an empire unraveling under the weight of whispers about monstrous secrets and illegitimate heirs. Even the birth of Isabella II, the child around whom Ferdinand tried to spin a final golden narrative of royal continuity, could not cleanse the stain of a dynasty built upon silken drapes concealing a biological nightmare. Instead, Isabella's fragile reign ignited civil wars as factions hurled accusations of bastardry and royal deception, their pamphlets adorned with grotesque caricatures of Ferdinand's infamous organ, a visual so salacious it could headline any dark history documentary today. And as Spain staggered through decades of blood and betrayal, one truth remained immovable. Ferdinand VII's monstrous secret was never truly buried. It remained lurking in the shadows, a forbidden relic of flesh and shame, waiting for the next historian, the next filmmaker, the next seeker of viral, dark royal drama to peel back the velvet curtain once more and reveal how the intimate horrors of a single man's flesh nearly destroyed an empire. And so we must ask ourselves, as history's echoes whisper through time, what other royal secrets still lie hidden, coiled, and waiting, ready to remind us that the line between majesty and monstrosity is sometimes only a heartbeat wide. And thus, as the final echoes of Ferdinand VII's reign fade into the gloom of forgotten corridors and dust-covered thrones, we are left confronting a truth so disturbing, so wrapped in forbidden history, that it belongs among the most viral of dark royal dramas ever whispered across centuries, that absolute power, when shackled to private horror, can transform a single man's flesh into the instrument of an empire's collapse. Ferdinand's grotesque anatomy was no mere physical anomaly. It became the living curse that infected every chamber of Madrid's palace, seeping into the fragile tapestries of diplomacy, faith and royal bloodlines turning velvet-lined rooms into theaters of medical intervention and royal marriages into brutal tragedies more shocking than any fictional horror ever conceived. His reign was a masterclass in how personal trauma can metastasize into national catastrophe, with courtiers forced into silent complicity, physicians coerced into surgical experiments, and queens reduced to trembling specters, drugged and restrained, sacrificed to a monstrous secret. None dared speak aloud. Each marriage was a chapter ripped from the darkest forbidden history documentaries. Each queen another victim swallowed by a royal bedchamber that offered neither love nor escape, only a relentless cycle of blood fear and silk-draped agony. Even after Ferdinand's tortured breath ceased, his monstrous legacy refused to die. The grotesque relic preserved in the Vatican's vaults, his 14-inch organ preserved like some unholy relic, remained the physical testament to how profoundly private flesh could warp public destiny. And with Spain left teetering under Isabella II, a queen whose legitimacy was questioned from birth, Ferdinand's ghost loomed over every political schism, every whispered conspiracy, as if his monstrous secret continued to puppet the fate of an entire nation. Meanwhile, Europe's monarchies watched in morbid fascination, terrified that within their own gilded halls might lie similarly explosive secrets waiting to detonate the illusion of divine rule. For Ferdinand's story is not merely the chronicle of one king's bizarre suffering, it is the eternal warning that behind the golden facade of royalty, the human body and mind can harbor horrors powerful enough to topple thrones and redraw maps. And as historians, filmmakers, and truth-seekers dig ever deeper into the archives of forbidden history, one question crackles like an electric current through the corridors of power. How many other monstrous secrets lie hidden, waiting to erupt into the world, and remind us all that sometimes the line between royal majesty and unspeakable tragedy is as thin and as fragile as a silk sheet. So as we close the blood-stained curtain on Ferdinand VII's catastrophic saga, we are left staring into the abyss of a question that chills the bones of historians and fires the engines of every viral forbidden history documentary. How could a single man's monstrous secret ripple outward to shatter queens, destabilize empires, and haunt an entire continent? With echoes of dark royal drama, Ferdinand's reign was not simply a reign of political incompetence, it was a reign devoured from the inside out by the monstrous paradox of power fused with private agony, a stark demonstration that when the body becomes the battlefield, entire nations pay the price. His grotesque endowment, hidden behind silk and gold but pulsing like a cursed relic beneath his regal robes, was never just a personal humiliation. It was the silent architect of Spain's disintegration, fueling rumors, marital disasters, and the kind of shocking royal scandals that viral content creators dissect with forensic fascination today. The truth is that each scream muffled behind velvet curtains, each secret autopsy hidden in Vatican vaults, each queen who staggered away, broken and addicted to laudanum, became threads woven into the grand tapestry of a kingdom coming undone. The royal palace transformed into a prison of secrets, its servants trained to tiptoe around a sovereign who might explode in rage at the slightest perceived insult, a man whose physical torment birthed a psychological tyranny that snuffed out the last flickers of Spain's imperial grandeur. Even in death, Ferdinand's grotesque legacy refused to vanish as factions battled for Isabella II's throne, hurling accusations of bastardry and conjuring the image of the monstrous organ that had condemned Spain to a dynasty of whispers and shadows. And so, Ferdinand's story endures as the ultimate dark royal cautionary tale, a potent reminder that the flesh of kings can shape the fate of nations, and that behind every gilded crown may lurk a secret capable of toppling empires. It's a legacy preserved not only in dusty tomes and hidden medical sketches, but in the collective subconscious of a world still mesmerized by the forbidden intersection where royal power collides with human frailty. And as we peel back the layers of this forbidden history, we must brace ourselves for the possibility that Ferdinand VII's monstrous saga is not unique, that the corridors of every palace may conceal secrets just as explosive, waiting for the perfect moment to tear the facade of majesty to shreds, and remind us that sometimes the greatest threats to kingdoms are born not in battlefields, but in the flesh and blood of the kings themselves. And so, as the shadows lengthen over the battered stones of the Spanish monarchy, we stand gazing into the lingering vortex left behind by Ferdinand VII, a vortex swirling with forbidden secrets, dark royal drama, and the echoes of screams muffled behind velvet curtains, all destined to fuel viral history documentaries for decades to come. His reign is not merely a grotesque footnote in Europe's royal annals, it is a chilling case study in how the private horrors of a single man's flesh can metastasize into national catastrophe, how a monstrous secret hidden beneath silk and ermine can ignite a firestorm that scorches queens, consumes kingdoms, and leaves an entire empire staggering beneath the weight of scandal. Ferdinand's monstrous endowment, that anatomical aberration so horrifying it was ultimately sealed away in the Vatican's vaults, became more than a medical anomaly. It became the sinister keystone upon which 1,000 conspiracies, civil wars, and whispered treasons were built. Every facet of his reign, from the drug-soaked terror of his wedding nights to the obsessive spy networks prowling his palace halls, was driven by the relentless collision between his private torment and his public power. The Spanish court transformed into a stage where queens wept silently in laudanum haze, physicians tiptoed through procedures more suited to torture chambers than bridal suites, and ministers quaked under the paranoid scrutiny of a king convinced that every gaze hid laughter at his monstrous curse. Even after death, Ferdinand's legacy refused to rest, for the question of Isabella II's legitimacy remained the spark that could set Spain ablaze, a narrative tailor-made for viral content that thrives on dark royal secrets and forbidden history. Meanwhile, across Europe, royal courts trembled at the thought that within their own gilded corridors might lurk secrets just as explosive, waiting to transform private shame into public disaster. For Ferdinand VII's story is not merely about one king's tragic anatomy. It is a dark mirror reflecting the perilous truth that absolute power, when fused to personal affliction, can transform the sacred institution of monarchy into a grotesque theater of pain and paranoia. And so, as historians, filmmakers, and seekers of hidden truths continue peeling back the layers of this forbidden history, we must brace ourselves for the possibility that Ferdinand's monstrous saga is but one chapter in a far larger book of royal horrors, a book still waiting to reveal its next shocking page. Because in the end, the story of Ferdinand VII is not simply the story of a king undone by monstrous anatomy, it is the blueprint for how private torment can warp public destiny, how a single grotesque secret can become the gravitational center around which politics, faith, love, and power all spin, dragged into a black hole of scandal that still pulses like a hidden heartbeat beneath Europe's royal histories, a narrative so potent, so drenched in dark, royal drama and forbidden history, that it continues to captivate viral documentaries and audiences who crave the hidden truths lurking behind gilded thrones. For Ferdinand's reign exposed a terrifying truth that monarchies have spent centuries trying to bury, that beneath the shimmering surface of royal rituals lies raw, vulnerable humanity, humanity capable of bleeding, of fearing, of carrying deformities that become the seeds of paranoia and tyranny. His life was the perfect storm where biology and power collided, transforming marital beds into surgical theaters, political alliances into medical consultations, and wedding nights into bloody spectacles more reminiscent of horror than romance. Every decision he made, every whisper of conspiracy, every exile or execution was driven not merely by politics, but by the pounding terror that somewhere someone was laughing at the monstrous secret between his legs. And as Isabella II's contested claim to the throne plunged Spain into civil strife, Ferdinand's monstrous legacy lived on not merely in the Vatican's locked vaults, where his preserved organ still rests like a forbidden relic, but in the blood-soaked fields where brothers turned weapons against brothers, shouting slogans woven from rumors of royal scandal and dark medical truths. Meanwhile, across Europe, royal courts bristled with anxiety, wondering whether their own lineages concealed secrets capable of exploding into similar chaos. For Ferdinand VII's story stands as a chilling warning that sometimes the true power behind thrones is not armies or alliances, but the intimate horrors hidden beneath silk and gold, a truth that remains irresistible to historians, filmmakers, and seekers of forbidden knowledge. And as we close this chapter on one of history's most shocking royal scandals, we're left to ponder how many other secrets still locked behind palace doors or buried in church archives are waiting to erupt, ready to remind the world that the line between royal majesty and monstrous tragedy is perilously thin. Because perhaps the most terrifying revelation of Ferdinand VII's dark royal saga is not simply the monstrous shape of his anatomy, nor the screams of queens silenced behind velvet curtains, but the enduring truth that history itself can become a prison, a palace of secrets where even centuries later, we're still trying to peel back the silk drapes to glimpse the forbidden horrors lurking beneath. His grotesque endowment, preserved like an unholy relic in the Vatican's vaults, stands not merely as a curiosity for medical historians or a tantalizing footnote for viral documentaries on dark royal drama, but as a stark symbol of how private suffering can metastasize into public catastrophe, infecting entire nations with paranoia, cruelty, and civil war. Ferdinand's reign laid bare the perilous reality that absolute power magnifies human weakness, transforming personal demons into state policy and bedroom tragedies into geopolitical crises. Under his rule, Spain became a living nightmare, where queens were drugged and restrained in medical experiments masquerading as marital duty, where ministers lived in mortal fear of the king's suspicion, and where even prayers and wedding vows were weaponized to shield the monstrous secret that lay beneath the royal silks. His life proved that royal majesty is but a fragile costume draped over mortal flesh that can carry deformities so profound that they alter the course of empires. And though Ferdinand has long since turned to dust beneath the marble floors of El Escorial, his shadow still looms large for the bloodlines he corrupted, and the suspicions he sowed continued to convulse Spain, fueling wars, revolutions, and centuries of whispered doubt. Even now, historians, filmmakers, and lovers of forbidden history remain transfixed, returning again and again to the chilling question that has the power to ignite viral fascination. What other royal secrets lie entombed, waiting to be unearthed, to remind us that the true monsters of history sometimes wear crowns? For if Ferdinand VII taught us anything, It is that the greatest horrors of monarchy are often born not in battlefields or council chambers, but in the silent agony of the human body, and that the ripple effect of one man's hidden torment can drown an entire kingdom in blood and shame. And so, as we close this chapter, we must wonder how many velvet curtains still tremble, hiding secrets so explosive they could rewrite the history we thought we knew. And in the end, the tale of Ferdinand VII leaves us staring into the deepest abyss of royal history, a place where flesh and power collide, where forbidden secrets become the mortar holding up entire empires, and where the line between majesty and monstrous tragedy blurs until it disappears completely. For Ferdinand's story is not merely the chronicle of a king cursed with grotesque anatomy, but a living parable of how one man's private torment can erupt into national chaos, a saga so charged with dark royal drama and forbidden history that it practically begs to dominate viral documentaries and captivate millions who crave the secrets behind gilded thrones. His monstrous endowment, hidden behind silk sheets and whispered about in terrified court circles, was never just a grotesque curiosity. It was a ticking time bomb buried at the heart of Spain's monarchy. It transformed royal marriages into blood-soaked rituals, converted palace corridors into echo chambers of terror, and turned queens into sacrificial lambs, whose bodies were offered up on the altar of dynastic survival. Every physician summoned, every artisan commissioned to craft bizarre marital aids, every tortured bride forced into surgical intimacy became unwitting participants in a royal conspiracy to preserve a throne crumbling under the weight of one man's cursed flesh. And even as Ferdinand lay dying, his breath rattling like rusted chains in the silent halls of El Escorial, his paranoia raged on, convinced that his monstrous secret would still rise from the grave to devour his dynasty. Yet Ferdinand's twisted saga is far more than personal tragedy. It is a chilling reminder that the architecture of power rests upon human fragility, that empires can be toppled not only by swords and revolutions, but by the private demons haunting the bodies of kings. For while historians and filmmakers pry open forbidden vaults and Vatican archives hunting for scraps of hidden truth, Ferdinand's preserved organ remains the ultimate forbidden relic, a silent testament to how deeply personal horrors can warp the fate of millions. And as Spain staggered into the uncertain rule of Isabella II, a kingdom haunted by whispers of illegitimacy and civil war, Ferdinand's monstrous legacy loomed like a specter over every political decision, every religious edict, every breath of the nation, which leaves us with one final chilling thought. If this is the fate of one king whose secret escaped the shadows, how many other crowns still rest upon heads, hiding secrets so explosive they could reshape the entire story of Europe? So as we emerge from the velvet darkness of Ferdinand VII's palace, blinking into the harsh light of history, one truth glitters sharper than any royal crown: that the greatest dramas ever played out in marble halls are not merely tales of politics and power, but of human frailty, hidden flesh, and secrets so monstrous they become the scaffolding upon which entire nations rise and fall. Ferdinand's reign is the ultimate forbidden history, a saga tailor-made for viral documentaries and midnight debates, because it forces us to reckon with a terrifying reality that the flesh of kings can steer the fate of empires, that a single deformity can ripple outward to drown queens, trigger civil wars, and haunt the bloodlines of Europe for generations. His grotesque organ, 14 inches of royal calamity preserved like an unholy relic in Vatican vaults, was never merely a physical oddity. It was a loaded gun pressed to the temple of Spain's monarchy. Each royal marriage was not just a political alliance, but a potential catastrophe waiting to explode as silk sheets became surgical tables and wedding vows transformed into medical experiments dripping with blood and laudanum. And in the shadows, Ferdinand's paranoia metastasized, weaponizing private torment into purges, exiles, and conspiracies so intricate that ministers trembled, and foreign diplomats scribbled secret dispatches destined for the archives of forbidden history. Yet what makes Ferdinand's legacy so chillingly viral is that it's not merely a relic of the past, it's a reminder that the secrets of power are always deeply, dangerously human. Behind every gilded door might lie another monstrous truth, waiting to burst forth, ready to remind us that even the mightiest crowns rest upon fragile mortal flesh. And so, as we close the blood-soaked curtains on this chapter of dark royal drama, one question hovers like a ghost over every royal house still standing. How many other velvet curtains conceal secrets so devastating they could set the world ablaze if ever pulled aside? Because the true horror of Ferdinand VII's story is not only what we've uncovered, it's what might still remain buried hidden, waiting to ignite the next forbidden chapter of history. And that, my friends, is why we must keep searching, keep questioning, and keep peeling back the silken layers of the past, for somewhere another monstrous secret waits to change the world all over again. Because here's the final chilling punchline to Ferdinand VII's saga, a truth so potent that it refuses to stay buried, demanding to rise again and again into the light of viral history documentaries, forbidden archives, and every whispered conversation about the dark royal dramas lurking behind Europe's golden crowns. That for all his monstrous anatomy, his screaming brides, and the silken sheets stained with blood and laudanum, Ferdinand VII was ultimately a man undone not merely by flesh, but by the merciless weight of secrecy and shame. His grotesque endowment, the 14-inch royal curse hidden away in the Vatican's vaults, became the physical embodiment of the Spanish monarchy's deepest anxieties, a grotesque talisman linking royal virility to political legitimacy and transforming intimate human frailty into a geopolitical fault line. It's a story that has become catnip for viral content creators and historians alike, because it reveals how the private horrors of kings can metastasize into scandals that topple dynasties and redraw maps. For behind every diplomatic envoy dispatched from Madrid, behind every ornate marriage contract or blood-soaked battle standard loomed the unspoken terror of Ferdinand's monstrous secret, a terror that warped his reign into a carnival of suspicion, cruelty, and surreal medical interventions. And even as Ferdinand's body crumbled beneath the weight of gout, paranoia, and exhaustion, the monstrous legacy he left behind continued to ripple outward, haunting Spain's royal succession and fueling civil wars where soldiers fought and died beneath banners tainted with whispers of illegitimacy and forbidden royal truths. Yet the most haunting part of all is that Ferdinand's story might not be unique. His grotesque saga leaves us with a burning question perfect for any viral YouTube thumbnail or dark history podcast intro. How many other monarchs carried secrets equally explosive, hidden diseases, twisted desires, anatomical anomalies that could, if revealed, shatter not only thrones but the very myths upon which royal power rests? And so, as we step away from the flickering candlelight of Ferdinand's haunted palace and into the broader corridors of European history, we're left with one final imperative: to keep digging, keep questioning, and never forget that sometimes the real monsters of history are the ones wearing crowns, hiding secrets so devastating that if unleashed, they might change everything. We think we know about power, legacy, and the fragile flesh beneath the robes of kings. And as we linger on the threshold between Ferdinand VII's haunted past and the secrets still lurking in the shadows of royal history, we must confront the ultimate truth that makes this story so irresistibly viral, so perfect for forbidden history documentaries and those late-night rabbit holes we can't help but fall into. That the monstrous organ hidden beneath the silken robes of Spain's king was more than a grotesque curiosity. It was the instrument through which a man's private agony became the crucible of a nation's doom. For Ferdinand's reign, from its blood-soaked wedding nights to the screams muffled by laudanum, was the living proof that when royal flesh betrays its owner, the consequences ripple far beyond the bedroom, spilling over into the fates of queens, the legitimacy of heirs, and the very borders of empires. His 14-inch anatomical curse, hidden away in the Vatican as a forbidden relic, wasn't simply a freakish physical trait. It became a dark gravitational force that twisted everything in its orbit, turning the Spanish court into a theater of paranoia and fear. Ministers plotted and whispered, physicians documented horrors they dared not publish, and ambassadors dispatched secret reports warning their monarchs that Spain was ruled not by reason or law, but by a king at war with his own body. Even the birth of Isabella II, intended to heal the fractures in Spain's monarchy, only deepened the wound as rival factions brandished rumors of Ferdinand's grotesque secret like weapons, painting his daughter as a false heir, born of deception and foreign conspiracy. But perhaps the most chilling lesson of Ferdinand's saga is this: that no matter how carefully the Vatican locks its vaults, no matter how deeply secrets are buried beneath marble and velvet, the truth has a way of clawing back to the surface. For history's forbidden chapters refuse to remain silent, and the monstrous shadows cast by Ferdinand VII's life remind us that behind every royal portrait, every golden crown, may lie hidden a secret so explosive it could detonate the myths upon which kingdoms are built. And so, as we leave behind the marble corridors of Madrid and the echoing footsteps of haunted queens, we're left with one burning question, the perfect cliffhanger for the next viral dive into dark royal drama. What other monstrous secrets are waiting coiled in the shadows, ready to explode and rewrite everything we thought we knew about the power and the peril of kings? For the deepest terror lurking beneath Ferdinand VII's monstrous saga, the reason it remains the ultimate forbidden history devoured by viral documentaries and whispered about in hushed tones across centuries, is the realization that his story is not simply about one man's grotesque anatomy, nor merely the shattered queens who vanished behind velvet curtains, but about the fragile illusion of power itself. Because Ferdinand's 14-inch anatomical curse, now hidden like some unholy relic in the Vatican's vaults, exposed a truth that monarchies and empires have always struggled to conceal, that beneath the gilded crowns and solemn pageantry lies raw, vulnerable flesh, capable of harboring secrets so catastrophic they can topple dynasties. His reign was a living nightmare, where biology became destiny, where royal marriages turned into surgical procedures, dripping with laudanum and blood, and where the echoes of personal torment metastasized into political purges and civil war. Ministers lived in mortal fear, courtiers spoke in coded glances, and entire factions formed around the grotesque question of whether Ferdinand's monstrous organ could ever produce a legitimate heir, a question that might seem almost comical were it not for the rivers of blood it ultimately unleashed across Spain. Even as Ferdinand's trembling hand clutched at power in his final days, his court had already become a grotesque theater of paranoia, every corridor humming with the suspicion that the next whisper, the next intercepted letter might contain the forbidden truth that would bring the Bourbon monarchy crashing down. Yet the true brilliance and horror of Ferdinand's saga is that it forces us to confront how little separates personal agony from national tragedy. It's the perfect storm of dark royal drama tailor-made for viral fascination, one man's hidden torments spiraling outward until it reshapes borders, dooms queens, and turns royal palaces into haunted labyrinths of secrets. And as Isabella II stepped into the blood-stained light of her inheritance, Spain trembled under the weight of the monstrous secret that had already consumed so many lives, leaving historians, filmmakers, and seekers of forbidden history all asking the same breathless question. The one that guarantees there's always another chapter to tell. What other horrors hidden in royal flesh and buried beneath marble and silk are still waiting to erupt, and remind us that even the grandest crowns rest upon the most fragile human bodies? And so, as the echoes of Ferdinand VII's tortured reign fade into the velvet darkness of history, we're left grappling with the monstrous lesson his story sears into the marrow of every forbidden archive and viral documentary eager to peel back royal facades, that absolute power is built not upon gold and lineage alone, but upon the fragile, trembling flesh of human beings. Flesh that can harbor secrets so grotesque they transform thrones into ticking time bombs. Ferdinand's 14-inch anatomical curse, now entombed like a forbidden relic in the Vatican's vaults, wasn't merely a medical anomaly. It became the fatal flaw that cracked the foundations of the Spanish monarchy, a grotesque catalyst that turned marriage into torture, love into trauma, and a king's bedchamber into a surgical chamber dripping with laudanum and whispered prayers. His reign was a symphony of dark royal drama where physicians drafted secret reports that read like horror scripts, where queens were dosed with opiates to endure nights that should have been filled with royal consummation, but instead became blood-soaked rituals of medical desperation, and where every flicker of Ferdinand's paranoia birthed new waves of political terror. Ministers disappeared, servants vanished. Diplomats sent frantic letters back to foreign courts warning that Spain was no longer ruled by statesmanship, but by the monstrous secret lurking between a king's trembling legs. And even in death, Ferdinand's legacy refused to rest as factions tore Spain apart over Isabella II's claim to the throne, her legitimacy forever poisoned by the rumors that the king who sired her was incapable of performing the very act required to continue the Bourbon line. Yet perhaps the greatest terror of all is the thought that Ferdinand's story is not unique, that lurking behind every velvet curtain and golden throne may be secrets just as explosive, just as capable of transforming royal palaces into haunted labyrinths of scandal and sorrow. Because if Ferdinand VII taught us anything, it's that the monstrous can dwell within the most exalted bloodlines, and that the thin silk separating royal majesty from monstrous tragedy can be ripped away in an instant, exposing secrets so catastrophic that they could rewrite the very history we think we know. And so as we draw this chapter to a close, one final electrifying question lingers in the air, perfect for the next viral dive into dark royal drama. What other horrors lie hidden waiting to burst forth and remind us that the true monsters of history sometimes wear crowns and carry secrets that can bring empires crashing down? And so, as we step away from the blood-soaked velvet curtains of Ferdinand VII's reign, one question burns brighter than any royal crown and echoes through every marble hallway where kings have paced in sleepless terror. How many other monarchs throughout history have ruled not simply with scepters and armies, but under the crushing weight of secrets so monstrous that if revealed, they could shatter the very foundations of their kingdoms? Ferdinand's 14-inch anatomical curse, sealed away like a radioactive relic in the Vatican's vaults, became the perfect symbol of this hidden truth, a grotesque piece of forbidden history that turned Spain's royal marriages into scenes of medical horror and political catastrophe, fueling civil wars and transforming one man's private torment into a national tragedy that still haunts the pages of every dark royal drama and viral history documentary. His story forces us to confront an electrifying reality tailor-made for YouTube's most viral rabbit holes, that behind every gilded portrait and solemn coronation there may lurk personal horrors powerful enough to topple empires. For Ferdinand's monstrous secret was not merely flesh and blood, it was a ticking time bomb buried within the architecture of power itself, where the king's inability to perform his royal duty twisted Spain's destiny into a nightmarish spiral of suspicion, marital trauma, and political violence. Even as Ferdinand lay dying, the palace was a labyrinth of spies, hidden passages, and velvet-lined torture chambers, each echoing with the footsteps of courtiers, terrified that a single slip of the tongue might unleash the king's wrath, or worse, reveal the monstrous truth hidden beneath royal silks. And though Ferdinand's tortured breath ceased in 1833, the seismic aftershocks of his reign continued to fracture Spain under Isabella II, whose claim to the throne remained haunted by whispers of illegitimacy and dark secrets lurking in royal bloodlines. But perhaps the most chilling legacy of Ferdinand's story is the realization that it might only be the beginning. For if one man's monstrous anatomy could ignite such chaos, what other secrets might still be locked behind palace doors, waiting for the perfect moment to explode into the light and remind us all that even the mightiest thrones rest upon human bodies as vulnerable and as monstrously flawed as any mortals, and that is why we must keep searching, keep digging, and keep daring to ask the questions that history tried so hard to bury, for somewhere another forbidden secret waits ready to rewrite the story of power all over again. Because if Ferdinand VII's tortured legacy teaches us anything, it's this shocking truth tailor-made for the viral world of dark royal documentaries and forbidden history rabbit holes, that beneath every crown lies flesh, and flesh can betray a king far more savagely than any assassin's blade. His monstrous 14-inch endowment, a grotesque relic now entombed in the Vatican's deepest vaults, was not just a bizarre anatomical anomaly, it was a ticking time bomb that detonated across decades of Spanish history, transforming royal marriages into bloody medical theater, turning queens into sacrificial victims, and forging a reign so soaked in paranoia and scandal that it continues to fascinate millions who crave the hidden secrets of royal power. Ferdinand's story forces us to look beyond the gold and velvet of monarchy and see the raw human terror that stalks even the most powerful thrones. For what toppled his reign was not simply political blunders or military defeats, it was the private hell raging beneath his silk robes, where biology became destiny and personal agony spilled out into the bloodied streets of a nation on the brink. Ministers cowered before his rages. Diplomats carried home tales of a court ruled by shadows and whispers. And all the while, Ferdinand's monstrous secret grew like a dark star pulling Spain's destiny into its gravitational vortex. Even after his death, his cursed legacy continued to warp the Spanish monarchy, sparking civil wars and planting seeds of doubt that still sprout in the historical imagination. But perhaps the most chilling thought of all is that Ferdinand VII may not be alone. His story leaves us with an electrifying question, perfect for any viral YouTube hook. How many other monarchs ruled while hiding secrets, just as explosive secrets capable of rewriting entire dynasties, redrawing maps, and transforming empires into cautionary tales? And so as we close the heavy velvet drapes on Ferdinand's monstrous chapter, we must remember that history's darkest truths often lie waiting coiled like serpents in royal bedchambers, poised to strike and remind us that behind every crown beats a human heart, vulnerable to desires, deformities, and horrors that can shape the fate of the world. And that is why the search can never end, because the next forbidden secret is always waiting to burst forth and change everything we thought we knew about kings and the kingdoms they built. And as we stand on the threshold between the velvet shadows of Ferdinand VII's haunted reign and the blinding curiosity of modern eyes eager to unearth forbidden history, one truth pulses like a hidden artery beneath every royal chronicle: that the monsters of history are not always tyrants on the battlefield, but sometimes the tortured kings pacing their gilded chambers, haunted by secrets so grotesque that they become ticking time bombs capable of detonating entire empires. Ferdinand's 14-inch anatomical curse, preserved like some ghastly relic in the Vatican's vaults, wasn't merely a bizarre medical fact. It was the molten core of a political and personal catastrophe, transforming a king's body into a prison, his marriages into blood-soaked rituals, and his court into a theater of paranoia so thick it could choke a nation. His reign is the very definition of dark royal drama, the kind of viral history content that grips viewers, because it forces us to see beneath the crowns and robes into the raw, vulnerable flesh that beats beneath royal insignia. For Ferdinand's monstrous secret did not simply stay hidden in bedchambers and medical reports. It spilled outward, poisoning diplomatic relations, fueling whispered conspiracies, and sowing civil wars that drenched Spain in blood. His queens became sacrificial lambs, their bodies battered and minds shattered in a desperate royal quest to produce an heir who might heal the fracture between the private horror of Ferdinand's life and the public spectacle of his kingship. And even now, centuries later, the tale refuses to die because it asks the question that thrills historians, filmmakers, and the viral true crime audience alike: how many other royal dynasties were built atop secrets just as monstrous, just as capable of tearing apart kingdoms and reshaping history's grand narratives? Ferdinand VII's story is the grim reminder that the line between royal majesty and monstrous tragedy is thinner than a silk curtain, and that what lies behind that curtain can change the destiny of millions. And so, as we close this chapter, dripping with forbidden history and dark royal scandal, we're left with the perfect viral hook for our next journey into Europe's hidden past, whose secrets are still locked away, waiting to explode, and remind the world that even the most glorious crowns rest upon mortal flesh, capable of harboring horrors we have yet to imagine. Because, as the final embers of Ferdinand VII's reign smolder into the darkness of forgotten corridors and forbidden archives, one revelation stands gleaming amid the wreckage, a revelation so potent, so perfect for the algorithm-driven hunger of viral history content that it refuses to fade, that the most earth-shattering events in royal history often begin not in the war councils or battlefields, but in the hidden chambers of the human body, where secrets of flesh and blood can ignite political infernos capable of consuming entire kingdoms. Ferdinand's monstrous 14-inch endowment, now locked away in the Vatican's vaults like a relic too blasphemous for daylight, was not merely a medical curiosity. It was the loaded pistol cocked at the temple of the Spanish monarchy, the hidden terror lurking beneath velvet robes, transforming kingship from divine right into a grotesque performance art, played out on silk sheets stained with blood and laudanum. His life is the perfect confluence of dark royal drama and forbidden history, the kind of narrative that has the power to capture millions because it reveals how profoundly human frailty can metastasize into national trauma. For Ferdinand's reign was no ordinary misrule. It was an empire held hostage by one man's anatomy, where ministers plotted in terror, queens wept themselves into oblivion, and physicians became silent keepers of secrets so explosive they could trigger revolutions. His monstrous secret didn't just warp his personal life, it warped the geopolitical map of Europe, birthing civil wars, fracturing alliances, and sending ripples of suspicion through royal courts, terrified that similar horrors might lurk within their own bloodlines. And even as Isabella II ascended to the throne amid whispers of illegitimacy and curses woven into the royal bedchamber, Ferdinand's spectral shadow loomed, ensuring that the Spanish monarchy would forever be haunted by the question of whether its very foundations rested upon a monstrous lie. Yet perhaps the most spine-chilling truth of all the perfect viral cliffhanger is that Ferdinand VII's story might be only the beginning. Because if one man's hidden anatomy could bring a kingdom to its knees, what other monstrous secrets still lie dormant in the palaces of Europe, waiting to detonate and remind us that beneath the crowns and ermine cloaks beats human flesh, fragile and flawed, capable of horrors beyond imagination? And so as we close this chapter of forbidden history, one final question echoes like a ghost in royal halls, whose secrets are still waiting to change the course of history forever. Of all the forbidden chapters lurking in Europe's royal annals, none burns so brightly, so luridly, and so dangerously viral as the twisted saga of Ferdinand VII, a king whose monstrous secret turned his reign into the ultimate cautionary tale that history and the internet simply refuses to let die. Because in the end, the story of Ferdinand VII is far more than the lurid dimensions of a single man's anatomy preserved in the Vatican's vaults. It's the grim revelation that the greatest forces shaping nations are not always armies or treaties, but the fragile, tormented flesh of the kings who wear the crowns. His 14-inch endowment, grotesque and malformed, hidden beneath silk sheets and whispered about in terrified corridors, became the molten core of a monarchy that collapsed under the weight of secrets too monstrous to endure daylight. This is the kind of narrative that the YouTube algorithm devours, an intoxicating cocktail of dark royal drama, forbidden history, and the deeply human truth that the private horrors of a single ruler can devour the destiny of millions. Ferdinand's reign was a labyrinth of velvet drapes and blood-stained linens, where every royal wedding transformed into a surgical nightmare, and every political maneuver was tainted by the looming terror of the king's unspeakable curse. Ministers tiptoed through marble corridors, terrified of glimpsing the monster that dictated royal policy, while foreign ambassadors scribbled urgent dispatches, warning their sovereigns that Spain was ruled not by governance, but by the monstrous tyranny of flesh. And in the hidden chambers of Madrid's palace, queens were drugged and restrained, their screams muffled by laudanum and silk, their bodies reduced to unwilling battlegrounds in a desperate, doomed attempt to produce an heir who might save the monarchy from its own biological apocalypse. Yet it wasn't merely a story of personal tragedy. Ferdinand's monstrous secret metastasized into the arteries of the nation, spawning conspiracies, igniting civil wars, and reshaping Europe's diplomatic map. The Carlist Wars tore Spain apart as factions brandished rumors of the king's impotence like weapons, accusing Isabella II of being an impostor, the child of adultery born not of royal blood, but of palace intrigue and foreign conspiracies. Revolutionary pamphlets flooded the streets, adorned with grotesque caricatures of Ferdinand's organ, transforming his private nightmare into public propaganda that fueled an empire's collapse. This is why Ferdinand VII's tale remains perfect fodder for viral documentaries. It's not just history, it's a human horror story that spills across borders and centuries. But perhaps the most chilling lesson, and the reason Ferdinand's story will keep echoing through YouTube playlists and midnight discussions for years to come, is that his monstrous fate might not be unique. Because what his saga forces us to ask in the most visceral, viral-ready way imaginable, is this: how many other kings, emperors, or sultans wore crowns while hiding secrets just as grotesque, just as capable of detonating the illusion of divine rule? Behind every polished royal portrait might lurk hidden deformities, secret diseases, or psychological demons so catastrophic that if exposed, they could topple entire dynasties and rewrite history as we know it. This is why Ferdinand's name refuses to fade into dusty archives, because his life is the ultimate reminder that beneath the golden crowns and marble halls, monarchs are flesh and blood, prone to the same frailties, terrors, and monstrous accidents of biology as the rest of us. His story is the dark undercurrent that makes royal history so addictive because it proves that sometimes the true monsters of history are not tyrants brandishing swords on the battlefield, but kings trapped in private hells whose personal agony spills out to drown nations in blood. And so, as we close this tale of forbidden history, we're left with the perfect viral hook for our next descent into Europe's shadows, whose secrets are still hidden, trembling behind velvet curtains, waiting for the moment they burst into the light and remind us all that even the grandest thrones rest upon human flesh, capable of horrors beyond imagination. And so as we leave behind the dark corridors of Ferdinand VII's palace, echoes of muffled screams and whispered secrets still swirling in the velvet shadows, one truth pierces the heart of this story and speaks directly to all of us, watching from the safe distance of centuries and screens that power, no matter how gilded, can never protect anyone from the raw vulnerability of being human. Beneath every crown beats a heart, terrified of shame, of exposure, of the monstrous secrets that might tear down not just thrones, but the very identity we build around ourselves. And perhaps that's why stories like Ferdinand's grip us so fiercely, because deep down we all fear that the things we hide, the flaws, the scars, the parts of us we believe too monstrous to reveal might one day be exposed. But Ferdinand's cautionary tale also hands us a key that secrets, when left to fester in the dark, can destroy everything, while truth, even painful truth, can set us free. So if there's one lesson we carry from this forbidden history, it's this: never let your hidden battles become the monsters that rule your life. Share your story, seek help, shine a light on your shadows, because it's secrecy, not imperfection, that devours empires and hearts alike. If this tale ignited your curiosity or left you wondering what other forbidden secrets lie buried in royal vaults, drop a comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts and the dark histories you'd like to explore next. And if you want to keep peeling back the velvet curtains of history's most hidden dramas, make sure to hit like, save this video for later deep dives, and subscribe so you never miss the next forbidden chapter. Because trust me, the secrets only get darker from here. Let's keep searching for truth, for history, and for the stories that remind us we're never alone in our human flaws.